Hey there, students. I thought I would do for you an example of a problem in which we are performing a hypothesis test to test a claim about the standard deviation of a population. So I'm looking at number 28 on our homework number 11. And so this will be a problem that's in Chapter 8, Section 4 of the book. So it says, data show, I think it means data shows, or the data shows that men between the ages of 20 and 29 in a general population have a mean height of 69.3 inches with a standard deviation of 2.3 inches. A baseball analyst wonders whether the standard deviation of heights of Major League Baseball players is less than 2.3 inches. The heights in inches of 20 randomly selected players are shown in the table, and then they have a link to a table here. So it says to test the notion at the alpha equals 5% level of significance. What are the correct hypotheses for this test? And again, so the claim we're looking at is that the standard deviation for the group of Major League Baseball players would be less than 2.3 inches, as opposed to being equivalent to 2.3 inches. So even before we think about using the data from the sample, we can set up our hypothesis and alternate tests. It says, what is the correct hypothesis for this test? So as usual, the null hypothesis will always be a setting of equality. And this is a test about the standard deviation, which is sigma. So for the null hypothesis, I'm going to choose sigma is equal to 2.3. And so then the alternative will be our claim, which is that it's less than 2.3. So the null or the alternative hypothesis will be that sigma is less than 2.3 inches. So now that we've set our hypothesis, it wants us to calculate the value of the test statistic. And the test statistic is the distribution score you would get based on the data in your sample, and assuming the null hypothesis is true of the standard deviation, in this case being 2.3. So as they show us in the notation, this is a chi-square distribution, so that helps us know what we're doing. A chi-square distribution is what you use for variance, right? The sigma squared is the variance. But they've given us a table of data. So if I look at the data, there's these 20 values, and I want to use StatCrunch. So I'm going to open these in StatCrunch. Well, it's going to give me a new window, so I will clear that window and move this window over. So now I have the data in StatCrunch, and so I want to find the test statistic of the chi-squared score. So I'm going to go to Stat, and this is a standard deviation distribution, which means we use variance stats. We have one sample. Again, you don't have two samples until at least Chapter 9. Whoops, keeps going the wrong one there. And in this case, we actually have the data. We don't have a summary of the data. We actually have the data values themselves. So I'm going to go with data. So then I pick the column where the data is, and I want to perform this hypothesis test. Now notice, when you are testing standard deviation, the distribution is for the variance, not for the standard deviation. You can see that because they have sigma squared, whereas over here we had testing just for sigma. So to perform the test in the calculator, we need to use sigma squared. So then instead of entering 2.3 for my null hypothesis, I have to square 2.3 and enter that in. So I'm going to grab my calculator and go 2.3 squared. That's 5.29. And so that's actually, in our variance test, the hypothesis test, is that the null hypothesis is that the variance is 5.29, and then the variance is less than 5.29, which is equivalent to these statements about sigma. But the test is run with the variance. So I choose the column for our data. I give them my hypothesis test in terms of variance instead of standard deviation, and then I compute. All right, so the first thing they ask for is the chi-squared statistic. This is a chi-squared test. And you can see here chi-squared stat. That's the test statistic they want. And we're supposed to do that to 3 decimals. So I will grab that because I'm going to have to round that up. So rounding that up becomes 40 in the end. So then they ask for the p-value, and that is also given here directly to 3 decimals. So I'm going to have to round that up also. Copying that over, rounding up the 4 to a 5. And so that's how we use StatCrunch to do a hypothesis test for standard deviation in the variance tool. And then we want to draw a conclusion. It says we were at the, what was the significance level? 5% significance level, and our p-value came out to be like over 20%. So since the p-value is greater than the level of significance, we do not reject the null hypothesis, and there is not sufficient evidence to conclude the standard deviations are less than 2.3 inches at the 5% level. So that's it. Hopefully this helps when you're working on the homework. Keep up the hard work, everybody, and I'll see you when I see you.